Hello and welcome to Partially Redacted. I'm your host, Sean Faulkner, and today I'm joined by Tim Jensen, privacy enthusiast, and we'll be discussing some practical advice for protecting yourself online. Tim, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being here. Why don't we start off with a little bit of an introduction? Who are you? What do you do?
So my background is in teaching. I was a school teacher for like 13 years, and then I went into sales for a number of years, like 14 or 15. I can't remember which. Now I'm into community organizing, which basically I work for a philanthropic organization where we organize a community of people who then can take action at the right times. Basically, I get paid to make friends now, so you can think of it that way. But my basic training is in teaching, and that's a lot where my passion is. Being a musician, I still direct a community choir. Although when I taught school, I was a school band teacher.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how did you get sort of involved and interested in privacy?
It's interesting because when I was just going through life, I encountered a number of security breaches, privacy breaches, where my debit card got compromised or my website got hacked and either defaced, and in one case, completely wiped out. And a lot of that just makes it more personal when that happens. I get a text message at 2:45 in the morning one day saying, "Hey, Tim, I accidentally logged into your Twitter account and it sent you a code." And then the next text says, "Could you send me that code?" Well, for all I did was roll over and go back to sleep and say, "Leave me alone." It was things like that where I got a call from the bank that said your debit card's been compromised. We think. Did you make purchases here? No, I did not. I had a website that was hacked that was redirecting to a merch site in China, that kind of stuff, and it completely ruined what I had going on the website that was hacked. So it's just through personal experiences where my privacy was invaded, and so I started to pay more attention to that kind of thing. I started listening to different speakers, different people, different tactics and techniques, and I got really excited about it because I thought, hey, it goes along with one of the philosophies that I have, that the only person you can really control is yourself. And so therefore, ask yourself, what can you do to make this situation better? I don't feel like I should rely on the laws. I don't feel like I should rely on the bank. I don't feel like I should rely on the web host. I should do what I can to make the situation better, and I should learn the tactics that I can learn. And so what I've decided to do is start to teach that to just regular people. And not necessarily the computer savvy, but just people who also have experienced some of the same things that I have. So that's kind of my background as to where I came from, and it's a passion of mine now, along with music and teaching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, I think even people who end up, I think a lot of times, like working in privacy professionally as a career, they come from some sort of personal story. Yes. Where is something happened that affected them, right? Like, you can be very, very personal. And there is, certain things that all individuals can do to help, protect themselves. Even recently, as today, my wife had texted me saying that she was had sent like a confirmation code about her credit card or something like that to her email. Could I send the like two-factor authentication code? And I was pretty sure that it was actually her sending me this text message, but because I work in the privacy security space, I got to be paranoid. So I was like, asked her a question that only she would know the answer to in order to verify that it was, her identity versus someone who maybe, it's not impossible that someone could spoof her phone number. It seems strange that they might target me, but it's not an impossible situation when you sort of educate yourself.
And you never know when you could fall victim to a SIM swap.
Exactly.
And something like that is what I teach, but I take it a step further. I say, I'll tell people, if you receive a text message, make a phone call. If you receive a phone call, make a text message, so that or maybe an instant message that's offline from that phone number. Just something that is different so that you can truly quickly verify that it's that person. So
yeah, it's like you're sort of enforcing your own 2FA against somebody who's reaching out to you.
Right. And you know, it's funny you should say that because two-factor authentication goes way back. This is not a new phenomena where all of a sudden we get six-digit codes in our text box. We've been doing this with our credit cards and our debit cards for a long time. That three-digit code that you have on the back of your card is a two-factor authentication. When they ask you for your zip code, that's a two-factor authentication or multi-factor, whatever you want to call it. So we've had that multi-factor authentication for a long, long time. We just didn't realize what it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of strange that I think everybody that works in the space has built SaaS applications and stuff like that now, like ideally has an MFA option built
Yep.
in, but a lot of times it's not necessarily on by default. Like even as recently as a couple of weeks ago, there was a lot of data breach news around accounts that had been compromised in Snowflake accounts, essentially. But they were all accounts that didn't have MFA turned on. And MFA isn't necessarily going to solve all your problems, but you're at least putting additional, barriers to entry. And it's kind of
Right.
like, people go after the easy target. So if you make yourself an easy target, you're more likely to end up getting compromised versus making yourself much tougher and put like people don't want to have to work for it when there's something easier to go for.
That's the approach I take too. I tell people, think of it like an onion. You've got layer after layer after layer that you've got there that you'll eventually get to the center. And of course, the drawback with the onion analogy is that there's nothing in the center. It's just a bunch of skins. It's a bunch of layers. But in reality, the harder you make it, they're just going to move on if they have to spend too much time on you. So you're right, and that's what I call my podcast is intentionally inconvenient, um, because I figure if it's convenient for me, it's convenient for somebody else, like a hacker. So that layer strategy is really what I focus on when I teach.
Yeah. It's just like if you're protecting your home and you have cameras on your home, there's clearly alarms on your home, you got a dog, like all these things, like
Yes.
it's just, yes, could someone break in your home? Absolutely. But is you're the easiest home on the street to break into versus, someone else that doesn't have all those safeguards in place.
Absolutely, absolutely, you're absolutely right.
So, you mentioned teaching some of these different tactics that you've learned about protecting yourself. Like, what are some of those tactics that you focus on in your teaching?
So obviously, for everybody, the password is very commonplace in society. Passwords have been around for a long time, and so society is kind of used to that. Back in World War II, we had cryptographers that would decipher the cryptography of the enemies, the Germans, the Japanese, and so forth. And there was a lot of things that once we learned their code, we were able to surprise them on a lot of elements. It's no different with our passwords these days. And so many times, the common mistake that people make with passwords, which is the number one thing that we use these days in the electronic media, is convenience. Where I want it to be easy to remember, and I always tell people if it's easy for you to remember, it's easy for a hacker to get into. They want to use um, they want to use my username and my password, and they want to use it at multiple places. Well, then we start spear phishing, which is a common term used for if you're using this username and this password on this website, there's a very good chance that you also are using the exact same login on other places. And once they get into certain areas, you're really leaving yourself very vulnerable. So the one thing that I teach is that convenience is the enemy of privacy. I'm full of cliches, and I'll be real upfront with you. I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, so it's easier for me to remember stuff using these cliches. But having said that, remembering passwords is only part of the process. I like to change it up and use email aliases for all my different websites, which includes owning several domains, which mean nothing. But I can use those domains as aliases because let's face it, if I use Facebook at whatever.com and then I use Twitter at whatever.com, it's not going to be very difficult to figure out the pattern. But if I have like 5 or 6 or 10 different domains that I'm using, now it's a lot harder to trace, along with a password that is random letters and numbers and 20 or more characters. And every password is different from every website. Again, it's the low hanging fruit versus the real tough stuff. They're going to just move on. they're not gonna chase after me. But it's the passwords, and I think the usernames are just as important, because it's like that. You go to the safe deposit box at your bank, you got two keys, you got the bank key, you got your key. Both keys have to be there, or else you're not getting into that safe deposit box. It's the same concept with the username and password. You got to have both keys.
So the idea behind the email alias is essentially that even if someone did compromise one of your logins, it doesn't necessarily expose other accounts that you have because they're going to be tied essentially to a different
That's correct.
alias. Is
They
that right?
don't know that it's necessarily me because it's a different domain name. So you're right.
Mm-hmm.
The other
Mm-hmm.
thing it does is it helps me to trace where the if I start to get spam, what ends up happening is I can trace where those emails have come from and see if there's been a compromise or a sale of my personal information from that website. So it's a way for me to track things, as well as a way for me to not to be unvulnerable, to coin a term a friend of mine uses.
Yeah, and you know, 80%, something like 80% of breaches relate to password theft or identity theft, and there's a bunch of different reasons for this, but I think a lot of it sometimes boils down to like insecure passwords, poor password management. Like, what are some of the issues people have when it comes to creating passwords? You mentioned, too short, too easy to remember. Like, what are some of those specific problems, and how should people think about going about fixing them?
I used to do this. I used to use my kids' names as my passwords, or my dog's name, or my wife's name as my password. And so what I leaned into was using personally identifying information. The industry term is PII in my passwords, and that was much easier to guess, especially if there's a data breach, because all that information is going to be in there. And I realize passwords are hashed and salted and so forth. So there is that might not necessarily be in the data breach, but once you figure out what equals what, it's not that hard to decrypt. But I think that a lot of it is, or they add a number after a password, the password one, password two, password three. And, if they're like when I taught school at one school, we were forced to change our password at work every 30 days. So that's what I did. I would add a number. It'd be a password one. It wasn't password, obviously, but it was something else. And then I put a one after it, and a two after it, and a three after it. It doesn't take very much to figure out what's going on. Um, and then another thing that they might do is write it down on a piece of paper and stick it by your computer. Well, okay, that's fine, but if they get access to your house, now what are you going to do? Because or like what I like to say on my podcast is, what could possibly go wrong? And the reason I say that is obvious. We know what's going to go wrong. We people, if we change it and we just add a different number to it, it's not that hard, because we're very sequential in nature. We're creatures of habit. Our brain is a pattern recognition machine, and we want to be able to recognize the pattern. We want to make it easy for ourselves. But the problem with easy is that, like I said, if it's easy for us, it's easy for someone else. And here's one other thing. People like to think to themselves, well, you know what? I'm not significant. Nobody's going to target me. I don't have a lot of money. I don't have a lot of this. I don't have a lot of that. They don't care. They target everybody. They target anybody. If you're in a data breach, it doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, old, young, smart, not so smart, whatever. They're going to target everybody. They're going to test everybody. And they might not get around to you for a while, but eventually somebody's going to get around to you. And that's why it's important to be proactive and say, what can I do to make my situation better? Because I know that I can't depend on anybody else, or at least that's the way I like to teach people, because then they're more willing to take action and not just let somebody else try and do it for
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then in terms of the way people think about creating passwords, do you see essentially people apply sort of different like human algorithms based on how sensitive they think the thing that they're signing up for is? So if I'm signing up for, my bank, maybe I'm using my most secure password possible. But if I'm signing up for something where, I don't know, it's a social media account or, one-off account, purchase I'm making, maybe I don't consider that as sensitive. And do I use sort of my easy version of my password so that I have these different categories? Is that something that you've
them.
seen?
I've done it. I know what you're talking about. I've done it myself. And this is before I really started to lean into this about 2 or 3 years ago. Um, people like easy. They like repetition. They like to make it easy for themselves. What I encourage people to do is to use a password manager. And I know that there have been password manager breaches on software, but that to me is pretty rare. There's only one that I know of for sure that's pretty well out there in the news, where that's been breached. A lot of them are end to end and zero knowledge encrypted. So they can't reset your password anyway. So if you got your password manager and you lock it down, that's a good thing. Another thing you can do is get a physical password manager, like an only key. And I'm not shilling for a specific company here, but it's the only hardware that I know of that's also a password manager. And what you can do with that is you put the 7 to 10 characters additional on that are random. And then you go into your password manager, you put in the password manager, and then you hit the button on the key so that they're together. So the full password is what's in the software plus what's in the hardware. So you're combining it and you
Mhm.
don't know either one. That's the beauty of it. And they can't get that hardware key from you unless they steal it from you physically. And that's just extremely rare. I'm not going to say never, but it's extremely rare. So when people are using the random, the name of the kid or the name of the dog or the name of the cat or whatever, and make it easy for themselves, I think they're short selling themselves when really it's not that hard to use a password manager or to use a combination like I suggested just now. It's all up to the individual on how much you want to put into it and how passionate are you and how vulnerable are you and have you been breached in the past. Really, that matters a lot because people don't look at privacy until they've lost it. They don't look at security until they've lost it. Just like any kind of
Mhm.
trust. Until they've lost it, they don't really consider it. They don't think about it. And I'm trying to teach people to think about it because it matters.
Yeah, and I don't know that you can fully depend on the companies that you're entrusting with your data to prioritize it the same way that you would necessarily would, because there's always a reason to sort of kick the can down the road when it comes to data protection, data privacy.
Until it's personal, it's not gonna affect you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned the splitting of the keys. That's interesting. I haven't heard of that as a consumer product, but it makes a lot of sense. That's something certainly in the like security world, sort of when you're dealing with encryption keys, that's a pretty common practice. Basically, you break up the encryption key and you store it in different locations. That way, in order to get the key to decrypt, it's not just a matter of hacking one system. You have to hack multiple systems and then put the key to get together,
Yes.
basically. And then usually that encryption key is also going to be encrypted itself, which is envelope encryption. So it's kind of going back to your onion analogy of you have to peel through back all these different layers of the onion just to get to the, well, in the case of the onion, the skin in the middle or whatever is going
Right.
to be there.
I mean, there's a couple of different uses for that analogy, but in this case, it does fit the bill pretty well because you peel layer after layer after layer, and I think the layered strategy for most people is really a good strategy if you have the patience to do it.
So beyond things like better passwords, potentially using multiple email aliases, like what obviously other things get exposed in breaches. There's other things about yourself, the other PII that you want to protect. What are some of the other steps that people can take to protect themselves?
So we talked about multi-factor authentication. There's what I like to teach is that you use something that you know, something that you are, something that you have. So the something that you know would be like your master password on your password manager. Something that you are, it could be a biometrics, whether it be your finger, your thumbnail, or your thumbprint, or whatever. Um, or I don't even know how a retinal scan would work with the software that's out there for consumers, but I'm sure that's possibly available. But then something that you have would be like a hardware key, two-factor FIDO, I believe it is, FIDO key, which I use YubiKey. And I preach YubiKey. I know a lot of privacy enthusiasts do preach YubiKey because they are, to me, the industry standard. However, there are other hardware keys besides YubiKeys that do work well. But the FIDO key, you have to physically have it. And so if you don't physically have it, you're done, which is a lot higher level than your 6-digit code that's texted to you because of the SIM swap, where you can have that. But there's something in the middle called an authenticator app, um, and some are better than others. I like the ones where you can move it from device to device, where like I use my YubiKey 5CI as my authenticator app, and you can do up to 32, I believe it is. where you plug it into your phone, it use the app, and then you use your biometrics or whatever to find the code, and then you pull it off of that, and that way it sticks right on the YubiKey. That's actually how I logged in here to get in to talk to you tonight. Is using an authenticator code, and and using it from the authenticator app. And because I carry it with me, it stays with me. Now there's also, I believe it's called Aegis, Aegis. I don't know exactly how you pronounce it, but that one you have to put a password in on your app. And it's a different password than your phone password. So having that second layer makes it, even if you get your phone stolen and they can find the password, they still can't get into your authenticator app. Stuff like that, where you're layering out your passwords. I use that even for my Proton Mail. So I have a different password on my Proton app than I do on my phone. It just makes it better because now you've got to know two passwords, and chances of people finding that out are a lot less. It makes me less vulnerable, I guess. But the authenticator app, the physical key, the FIDO, I think it's FIDO 2 if I remember right. And the least one, although it's better than nothing, would be having the 6-digit code texted or emailed to you. Banks are notorious for that. That's what they like to use, and it's to me the weakest of the multi-factor authentication options.
Yeah, I think it's the easy one. It's the older one. Like you said, it's better than
Oh
nothing,
yeah.
but it's not great. But back to the MFA thing and some of the things that we were talking about earlier, where most, I would say most sort of SaaS type applications support MFA now, but they might not have it on by default. So I think another thing that people can look at is go into their settings and make sure that they turn on MFA. And at the very least, they have that SMS, email, second factor line of defense for protecting their accounts.
I agree. If I had not had someone suggest that to me, I would have lost my Facebook account. I would have lost my Twitter account. And um, that's very personal when someone hacks into your social media accounts. And if you don't use them, that's fine. A lot of people in the privacy areas don't use them. I use them less than they used to, but regardless, if someone hadn't suggested to me to turn the two-factor on, I never would have done it. I would have lost both accounts already. That's the thing. People don't take privacy seriously enough. They need to take it just as serious as locking their car, locking their house, your safety deposit box at
Right.
the bank. All those things. We take all of our valuables, our financial valuables seriously, but we have something to protect. And here's another thing I hear, and I know this is off topic of what you were talking about a second ago, but so many people including people that are close to me, say, you know what, I don't have anything to hide. Nobody's really out to get me. And I'm thinking to myself, that's the wrong way to think. You really need to think of you may not have anything to hide, but you have something to protect. You protect your family, you protect your valuables, you protect your house, you protect your car. And you should value those things. You should value those people and you should be protecting them just like you should be protecting yourself. The idea that because I am putting passwords on every different website and YubiKeys and so forth. Um, like I'm hiding something. You're not guilty of anything, but if you don't take proactive measures, you're not helping yourself any, and you're not treating your privacy seriously enough.
In terms of I think like the idea that people don't have anything to hide. I've heard people talk about that in terms of like there's so many breaches that happen all the time. At this point, like I don't care because my PII is all out there anyway. But uh, something like a breach of your account data or a leakage of your PII in association with another product or whatever it is or service has less to do with the fact that your home address is out there, your phone number is out there. It's more about the association between you and whatever that service is. So maybe you're okay having people be able to look up your address or your phone number, but are you okay with your entire medical history and every doctor's visit that you ever had being transparently available to everybody online, or every purchase that you've ever made online? Do you want that information available, or every website? Like it's the association between you in the things that you do that is important.
You're right, and I'm glad you brought that up because so many times we use our address or our phone number or our personal email address as an identifier. We identify, it's part of our identity. And so one of the things that I like to teach, number one, you can go online to these data brokers and request that your information be removed. And there's a list of them that Michael Basil says are the best ones to use. And he said start there and ask them to delete your information. You got to be vigilant and continue to do that, or you can use a service out there. I think there's Delete Me and Privacy Bee and some other ones out there, where you can pay someone to do that, and that's not a bad thing if you are strapped for time or whatnot. But so that's for your identity, but then diluting that information. In other words, going and getting a bunch of voice over IP phone numbers, using a bunch of email aliases, getting a traveling mailbox so that you can use multiple addresses. Diluting that information makes it a lot more difficult for someone to tag it onto you. Even using personal aliases, you can go to thispersondoesnotexist.com and get an AI picture that you can take from, and then there's other websites that will help you create entire aliases, including your demographics, your your name, your age, your industry, all that kind of stuff, and you can compartmentalize that, putting it in your password manager so that you can use that later on. But and that's why I say diluting that information and getting that diluted information out there will also help with that identity issue that you were talking about, so that it's a lot harder to tag your medical information to you and to your address and to your phone number and to your email address, because now you've got 5 phone numbers, you've got 5 email addresses, and you've got multiple physical locations. The idea is you can't change the past, and you're right, you can't change the past, but that is not necessarily, yeah, but that's everybody's got that problem. It's not necessarily that big of a deal because the most valuable data to these data brokers is current data, recent data. Anything that's a year old, 2 years old, 3 years old is a lot less valuable because people move, people change their email, people change their phone number, whatnot. So it's really important that we are diluting that information and making it harder now because, oh, maybe he moved. Maybe this is his new address. Maybe this is his new phone number. Maybe this is his new email address. And all of a sudden, you can dilute that and you can track where this stuff is coming from. So I think that it's all hope is not lost. Hope is never lost. You can always start today and move forward because the most valuable data of these data brokers is current and recent data.
Are there sort of so we you mentioned some various like newer techniques for essentially multi-factor authentication like UB keys and so on. We also I think you mentioned biometrics as another way for authenticating. Like, are there other sort of future novel approaches that you're aware of that you're excited about that you can see as something that's going to be available to consumers, or maybe they're available now but not that widely used, that can help protect some of your online self?
I've mentioned a number of them already. Like the alias thing, the diluting of your information is one that I have started to implement in some areas. There are You can use a network attached storage to use for a cloud service, so that that cloud information that we all store on the cloud, we all have our own personal cloud space, or a lot of people do, can be done locally and backed up. The redundancy is also important. You want to get multiple copies, and you want to have 2 locations for your network attached storage in case something happens at the one location. You've still got the backup in another location. But the network attached storage is extremely helpful, because now you control it. It's local. It's not under the control of another company. We put a lot of our trust in a lot of companies out there. Um, even financial privacy. Back in 1970, the United States Congress put into effect the Bank Secrecy Act, and what that did was that made your financial institution report to the government any transaction over $10,000. And back then, that might have been just a house. It might have taken 2 cars to reach that amount of money in 1970. Today, you get about 3 wheels on your car and it's 10 grand already. But that dollar amount never was indexed for inflation in that legislation. So therefore, everything is reported to the government. We're naive if we think that the government is immune to breaches, security breaches, data breaches. But, and again, it's not a matter of I have nothing to hide, but they don't need to know. There's a Fourth Amendment for a reason. There's a reason why we have the limitation on unreasonable searches and seizures without a warrant. And it has nothing to do. It has a lot to do with phishing and a lot of PHISH, that kind of phishing, where they're fishing for information because they want to just have a record of it. And so there's even the government we have to be careful of. And so you might want to consider using a decentralized, like a cryptocurrency. Now, this is not something I've delved into, but there are privacy respecting cryptocurrencies because those can be mixed with others so that they can't identify this transaction to you and this transaction to someone else. They're mixed together, so it's hard to tell that. It'd be like, 5 people going behind a wall, and then when you walk out on the other side, you see 5 different people that come out on the wall. We're not really sure who did what. But the idea with cryptocurrency, especially like Monero and Zcash, I think are the two that I'm aware of that are more privacy respecting, is it's just to maintain your privacy in different transactions. Now, that's not really popular in society, but it is popular in certain parts of the country, like New Hampshire is one, where you can use cryptocurrency in retail and go to a retail outlet and pay for it at a mom and pop shop, that kind of thing. So cryptocurrency would be another way for privacy respecting, especially with all the digital dust or digital trails that are left out there whenever you swipe a card, whenever you use a credit card number. You can use privacy.com to mask your credit cards. So there's a number of things privacy.com does. Number one, it gives you the opportunity to limit how much each card has. So let's say you've got a Netflix subscription and I don't know what Netflix even costs because I don't use it, but let's say it's $19.99 a month. You can limit that card to $20 a month in transactions, and that's it. So once it's spent, that's it. And you have not given out your debit card or credit card number. You've given out a pseudo one, a different one. So
proxy.
proxy. Thank you. You can use that to protect your financial data trail, but more importantly, keep your card numbers to yourself. There's all kinds of little services out there you can do that. MySudo, you can buy up to 9 voice over IP numbers. You can even port your number there, your current phone number, so you wouldn't lose your phone number. And you can do different states. You can do different communities, so you have different phone numbers in different areas. A lot of it, like I say, the diluting of the information, I think, is so important because you're protecting the most valuable stuff that you give to people that you only met face to face, that you see face to face.
Yeah, absolutely. As we start to wrap up, Tim, is there anything else you'd like to share?
I've started beginning of the year, I started my podcast at intentionallyinconvenient.com. I also have it on YouTube. I've had to take a bit of a break because work has really gotten busy, but we're going to be starting it up again in the next couple of weeks, where I'm going to be teaching more about the email aliases, the personal aliases, and I'll give specific examples and so forth. Nobody's sponsoring this. Nobody's paying me to do this. It's coming out of my own pocket because I just feel so passionate that I want to share this with people so I can point my friends to this thing where they can listen and watch it. Because I think it's that important. And, I heard one of your guys on your podcast say that the most important thing in our world is our relationships. And I totally was just like, yes, when I heard him say that. I forget who it was, but it was just one of those stellar moments on your podcast that I was just like really impressed with your guest. Relationships is what we're here for. That's what we do. We're not here to collect stuff. We're not here to collect money because we all know that it doesn't stay with us when we pass anyway. So our biggest thing that we can do while we're on this earth is to foster relationships. And if we can help another person out, we should do it.
Very well said, Tim. I think that's a good place to leave it. Tim, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks for inviting me. Again, my podcast is Intentionally Inconvenient at intentionallyinconvenient.com.
Cheers.
Thanks.